This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Canna Health.
Hey cannabis consumers, have you ever consumed a cannabis product thinking it'll make you feel a certain way, but then it doesn't? Don't you wish you had a clear understanding of your own DNA so that you could make informed decisions about what type of cannabis products interact best with your system? Well, now you can with EndoDNA. EndoDNA is a simple DNA test that maps your entire endocannabinoid system and then matches that summary with a specific cannabinoid ratio and terpene profile that best aligns with your unique genotype. Imagine being armed with personal information when visiting a dispensary. You'll have the knowledge and power and capability to purchase products that best align with your genotype. Visit their website to purchase the EndoDNA Collection Kit and Endo Decoded Report at endodna.com/products and use the promo code CONNECT15 for a 20% discount. Again, that's endodna.com/products and use the promo code CONNECT15 for a 20% discount. The future of cannabinoid therapeutics is here with EndoDNA. Becca Williams, how are you?
Oh, I'm great, Kevin. I so appreciate you having me on. I mean, I really appreciate your work and bringing to the forefront leading voices in the cannabis arena and extending it to the more esoteric aspect of what I do. So I just want to say thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Of course, of course. The pleasure's all mine. Thank you for making time for me in the audience today, especially as you're out on vacation. I before we started recording, you mentioned you're in Hawaii, so congratulations on that, man. That's awesome. Enjoy it out there.
Yeah, it's nice to have some downtime. I mean, it's really kind of a working vacation. Because I'm a teacher and a coach and a mentor, so there's constantly ongoing appointments that I have. But it's kind of a laid back atmosphere, and it's nice.
Totally. Yeah, I would imagine that in your line of profession, the work never stops, right?
You can dial it back. So I have I mean, my signature courses are 8 weeks long, so they're 2 months on and then 1 month off for what we call integration. And so I have that month where I'm not teaching classes, but as you understand and say, there's much more on the table to do.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, so before we dive into all that, Becca, let's allow the audience to get a sense of you and your background. So from what I've gathered, the research that I've done and some of the podcasts that I've listened that you've been on, you were a former news anchor and reporter for NPR, and now you've turned into an emotions therapist and educator, blending Western medicine and Eastern traditions. So tell us a little bit about that journey, like, your life and kind of the journalism side of things. And then, this switch over, how did that happen?
Yeah, I was a professional reporter, a journalist in Chicago for National Public Radio, but also I was a producer and anchor for a number of television stations as well, and including in Chicago. So I had done that most of my life. And it was an interesting pivot, Kevin, because about in 2014, along that time, all my life, let me just back up for a moment. I had been wrestling with difficult emotions, anxiety, depression, oh my gosh, sadness, anger. And it's because I came from a very difficult childhood that was unpredictable, and it was dangerous at times. And so I had a lot of trauma from that. And I was an overachiever. And there's a whole backstory to that, but at another time, perhaps. And so I wrestled with these difficult emotions for all my life, and always looking for some way to feel better. And I lifted up a lot of rocks looking for answers, including a lot of time with therapists, and I'm sure that talk therapy went a long way for me and helped me. But
to pause you on that,
yeah.
Becca, I'm just curious. So when you talk about lifting up those the rocks to kind of feel better as you're battling and wrestling with all these different emotions from that trauma of your childhood, what were some of those you know, areas that you looked into to get better, and what was kind of the process? What did that look like?
Yeah, great question. So as I mentioned, talk therapy, and in our Western framework of how to feel better, we have as far as emotions are concerned and trauma, is that talk therapy. That's sort of the the main piece in our culture, but also, looking for meditation. I studied Buddhism and Kabbalah, which is the mystical form of Judaism, to learn how to meditate, to go inward. Because if the science part, which is psychology part, doesn't work, then you turn to something else, and that was essentially spirituality.
Hmm.
And for me, retreats and ashrams and doing all of this in trying many things, but it didn't work for me because with meditation, which is all the rage today, is that it's mindfulness meditation where you're sitting and you're just going inward and being quiet. Well, in our busy and distracted world, and also for me, because I had a lot of dissociative symptoms also, where sitting down and just being quiet and going in was impossible for me, just pounding incessant thoughts. And so as hard as I tried, I couldn't do that. And I find it's a two-pronged thing. First of all, I couldn't do it, and then because everybody else seems to be doing it, there's shame that comes in because I couldn't do it. Why is everybody else being able to do it and I can't do it, right?
Right.
And so
Was it just the sitting part of it? Like, was it that you were kind of, I mean, it wasn't the meditation factor, it was more so like, how can I meditate in more of an active form, perhaps?
yes. And that's what I stumbled across in 2014 when I was looking for something, and I encountered the work by a Kundalini master. Kundalini is a form of meditation and yoga from, of course, India. And the lineage incorporates a lot of active and expressive meditation that brings sound in and movement and breath, a lot of really great breath work. And so you're really working, you're really moving it. And that made so much sense to me when I came across this and I started doing it, and it started working. And so from there, I finally found the approach that worked for me. Now, having said that, I did achieve a success in my career, in my livelihood. I was, in Chicago, in television, in radio news, and in other markets as well. But I was a workaholic. I was a control freak, and I still work with that, but it's so much better. There were a lot of things. I mean, my anger was just ready to pop at any time. I found out that in one of the television stations where I worked, when I left, I found out that my nickname was Barracuda. I mean, here I was trying, managing people, and this is, and so my anger preceded me.
I laugh not at you. I laugh that it's sometimes just so funny as human beings, we kind of reflect back when we hear other people kind of describe us, right? And you're like, wow, like I never thought that I would be described that way or be perceived in that way until you step outside of yourself and you take time to reflect and hear that, right?
Yeah, it was a cruel reality, and it hit home that I had some anger issues, of course. And you'll find that a lot of people who have been traumatized in their lives, and remember that we all have been traumatized to a certain degree,
Sure.
more or less. And it might, more might have been ongoing developmental trauma in an unpredictable and dangerous childhood like mine, to maybe just one-offs where we're all so sensitive. So a traumatic event for somebody could have been being stood up for homecoming date, and feeling rejected, and that could have just been a real piece. So we know now that we all have had trauma to some effect, some effect on that spectrum,
Mhm.
and so how to deal with it. So yeah, that was me. I forget where I was going with that,
Well,
but
when you talk, well, I'll get us back. So meditation was kind of one dimension that you saw as I'll kind of use it as like a tool within your toolbox to release some of that trauma that you'd experienced, right? So going along this kind of journey of you in this discovery mode, what in addition to meditation was helpful?
so the plot thickens because way back in college, as a freshman, someone introduced me to cannabis. And of course, that was, in the days when it was underground. But I felt a lot better when I started smoking cannabis. And so I started self-medicating with that and realizing that I felt a lot better when I was under the influence of it. The only thing was that when I was in a group social setting, I would get anxiety. So if I, how they used to, before COVID anyway, pull out a joint and pass it around, and you it'd be great socializing. Well,
Yeah.
I couldn't. My anxiety would ramp up. But I found that if I self-medicated with cannabis on my own by myself, I felt so much better. So that's actually what got me through. That was the through line all those decades during my career. I mean, I had a whole profile, I had a high profile career, and I was doing cannabis all the way through, and keeping it on the QT. But the issue with cannabis, excuse me, the issue with cannabis is that I felt better while I was under the influence of it. But when I was no longer under the influence, then that anxiety would come racing back. So it was transitory and palliative. And it was, I wanted more. I wanted more than that. So when I discovered this emotional liberation work in 2014, I started adding the cannabis, small doses of cannabis, to the work that I was doing with this Kundalini master, who, by the way, I kept him well informed, because in that framework of Kundalini, you don't do any drugs at all. But I let him know, and he said, "Hey, Becca, it's okay. You do whatever you need to do, but that's not within within my rails. I don't do that." But I found that in the study of this, that actually doing the work, the practices, with a little bit of cannabis, a little bit. Now, again, we're also individual, that some will not do any THC. It might but just be CBD, and I always like a 2-to-1, twice as much CBD as THC. Of course, you can get very complicated too and talk about terpenoids and all the other cannabinoids. But when I'm teaching people the basics, and I have a number of people who will come in who don't know anything about it and need to, and their learning curve is high. We just cut to here, CBD, THC, and the ratios. So for me, just a very little really took me into this, along with this meditation. And just what we're doing is going in, because it is the intuitive. We're touching into the intuitive. And this is what I do that's different probably than most of the people that you interview, is that I use it consciously or intentionally. And I tend to call this the third wave of cannabis, the first one being recreational, the second wave being medical. If it hurts, then cannabis will make you feel better. And then the third is the psycho-spiritual approach. And that's how I define my space, is the conscious or intentional use of cannabis. So paired with this work, I found that the process, the healing process, was much faster.
Yeah, I'm gonna pause you because there's a lot to unpack there, and there's a lot of good stuff that you said, Becca. And first and foremost, I want to say that I can completely relate to your experience in college. And before this interview, I was trying to think about traumatic experiences, my childhood. I had a good childhood. I have great parents. I was an athlete. I was a wrestler. So the hyper competitiveness of what the sport entails, and the demanding nature of it with your weight and your managing your weight and stuff. So that kind of all was. But one thing that I reflect back on in college was cannabis really did help me a lot, because that was really the first time where I had embraced cannabis as a part of my lifestyle, because I had walked away from the sport of wrestling after my freshman year of college, and I had been wrestling since I was 5 years old. So in that time, I to your point, I felt better when I had consumed. Like after I consumed, the stress, the anxiety, the worry of class, of being, across the country away from my entire family, going to a school that was 97% white, 2% black, 1% Hispanic, me being a Hispanic male, it was just all these different emotions that were kind of floating around inside of me as a young adult. And I got to tell you, cannabis was one that, to your point, it helped me feel better in the moment, but then it dissipated once I wasn't high anymore. And so I like how you took the approach of over time, just kind of adding to this toolbox. I mean, you started with meditation, you added cannabis. I've been doing that similarly, in that, exercise is really good, right? It helps me keep a clear head and just be, not feel as stressed. Cannabis obviously helps. So tell me a little more about this idea of consciousness or intentional use of cannabis.
Sure. So let me back up and just say, basically, I teach people how to heal themselves of difficult emotions and the trauma, as we've been discussing, that underpins it. Because all these emotions that we feel are underpinned by trauma. So we really need to get to the source of why we're acting the way we are, and being able to meet it, as I say, meet it, greet it, so that we can release it. I'm most known for the work I do in immersive therapeutic group settings, where we apply real world experience, and we use cannabis in a very intentional and conscious manner in this respect. And psilocybin microdosing, I've just recently included in the last number of courses that I have done. And let me just say, Kevin, that it's all optional for people, but by and large, most of my students and clients come in either employing one or the other, or wanting to employ one or the other. And so, of course, what I need to do is also educate them as well on the plant medicines. Mm-hmm. So, I find that most people who come to me, that they've been searching for years for answers to their emotional problems, and they've like me, they've been through a lot of stuff. I mean, if you take surveys, as I do among the groups, there's been a lot of therapy, and there's been a lot of trying of spiritual approaches, and like me, nothing for them worked. Now, let me just talk about therapy for a moment. And see, the issue with therapy is that we're using the cognitive, the thinking brain, to try to solve problems that are intuitive. And so that's an issue. I remember when I used to go to talk therapy, I'd be driving to the therapist and thinking, well, what am I going to talk about today? And kind of come up with something. But what in the work, and so people can only get so far with talk therapy.
You're saying because we're already predisposed to our own kind of set of beliefs or experiences or rationale of thinking, that it's hard to get outside of our own head to really identify and get to the heart of the problem.
Yeah, right. Exactly so. So we can't solve our trauma by trying to outthink it. We realize that, we know that now. We have to do something different. Mm-hmm.
And that's where I could see something like THC, cannabis, or even psilocybin would help, because the psychoactive properties of these plant medicines right? Especially psilocybin being a psychedelic really kind of takes yourself out of yourself, and it really allows you to really reflect as to why you're feeling the way you are and remove the ego, I would assume, right?
Very much so. And there's a, there's a difference between full-blown psychedelic journeys and what we do in my work, where
Microdosing.
it's psilocybin microdosing. And
Right.
microdosing, for those who don't know, are small amounts that you take in certain protocols. There's a couple of familiar, the Stamets and Fadiman protocols, where you take it X number of days and then you're off X number of days. But with the cannabis is when you're sitting down to practice. And in my work, what I, as a clinical nutritionist, I'm trained as a clinical nutritionist, behavior modification is really the hardest thing to do. So that's why I want the rubber to hit the road. And so we meet twice a week in my 8-week courses, because I want this behavior. I want you to change your behavior. And I want to keep you accountable to yourself. And so one of those 90-minute sessions every week is a practice that we do, and we welcome and acknowledge the plant medicine before we go into it. Yeah, so that's what we do there.
What are the the patients that come in or the clients that come in that you work with, like how do they differ among the psilocybin crowd to the cannabis crowd, if they do at all? I mean, is there similarities? Is there differences? Like, what are people seeking with different types of experiences utilizing those different plant medicines?
Well, so does this sound familiar? You're going along and somebody says something or does something, or an errant thought comes up, and you're triggered and you are off to the races, whether it's self-doubt or anxiety or anger. And there's this emotional tsunami that rolls over you and you don't know what's going on. You just know that it feels awful and you want out now. And you're encountering this overwhelming situation, and it happens very quickly, that the emotions that erupt and can erase any control you thought you had. And you know what I'm talking about. And you feel like you have absolutely no control over the situation. So what we do is we learn what emotions are. We parse out. In my work, there's 7 different emotions. There's a palette of 7 difficult emotions: anxiety and fear, anger, depression, sadness, guilt, shame, and desire, like addictions, and so we learn those. And I'm getting to your question here by informing you in regard to you learn the emotions first, and then we spend a month on each emotion in this work. And so we will go into that. So what we're doing during the work is calling up this emotion that is knocking loudest on our head. And in order to do that, we are actually guiding it. We are guiding it and using small amounts of psilocybin or cannabis to do this, on top of whatever the other things that we're doing. But if you're doing a psychedelic journey, you're letting the entheogen have its way with you. So you're not giving it any rails to stay within. You're just going, okay, I'm going to go on this journey, and it's going to have its way with me, and it's either going to be an easy or difficult trip or whatever. So what we're doing is we're guiding, and that's not what a full-on psychedelic journey is. So that's where that little bit comes in and really amplifies the work that we're doing. Now, I have the whole gamut of people coming in, people who are grappling with difficult emotions, and that transcends all genders, all ages. I mean, in this latest coursework, my youngest is 24 and my oldest is 74. and everything in between. And people, I always do, as a clinician, I always do an intake form with my people, so I know what's going on with them. And many of them have gone that route of psychedelic journeys, full-blown psychedelic journeys, and it hasn't done anything for them. It hasn't worked for them. And I really believe the reason is that there's not good integration around that. And that's a whole nother conversation that we can get back to. But Kevin, to just answer your question, it is people who've not had any experience with cannabis, people who have not had any experience with psychedelics, veterans of both, and everything in between.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes sense. And you did answer the question. I appreciate that explanation. And it sounds like basically like y'all take a due diligence approach, which makes a lot of sense, right? It's like before we, immerse you into, a microdosing experience with psilocybin or cannabis, we need to first understand what emotions are apparent, or like, that need addressing, that are, hampering your life in some way, or causing
Right.
Traumatic experiences.
And we feed the cognitive, we feed the thinking brain. The mind wants to know, what are we going to be doing? What are we going to be doing? And so in the other session that we do is the education, is the cognitive thinking, where we actually feed the mind and tell you what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. And then the other session, we drop into the intuitive and get in touch with our deep inner resources, our intuition, our soul. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I like that. It makes a lot of sense, because to your point, if you're someone who has little to no experience with psychedelics at all, or microdosing cannabis or psilocybin, it's going to be a pretty intense experience, right? And especially if you haven't fed that cognitive brain, to kind of look out for what we need to address. And so I really like that approach of microdosing psilocybin with intention, using cannabis intentionally. So let's talk, since it's a good segue, about this term of integration, right? That comes up a lot of space in the psychedelic space. To tell us about integration and what that means.
Yeah, so integration essentially is the alignment of the mind and the body following state shifting work. And that can happen during a psychedelic journey, as well as deep meditative experiences. And so, in these deep immersive emotional explorations, things surface. And making sense of it all is what you need to do. You have to have a process to make sense of it all. Because if you have all of these changes, and that's what we're doing the work over 8 weeks to tone and condition our nervous system and start rewiring our brain and our nervous system as well. Okay, well, that's happening. What's happening when I'm walking out into my world? Same old, same old. So people are still treating me with disrespect, or I don't have a doormat mentality anymore. I am not in a place where I'm with crippling self-doubt. I'm stronger. I'm more confident. But how is that plugged into what my life looks like? And so things like, the relationships that we've had forever that might be not the healthiest. There might be some toxicity around it. Well, we need to actually use our executive functioning to understand how we need to draw boundaries around those relationships, whether that person, whether it's a friend or a coworker or a significant other, are they going to step up and start treating me differently? Or do I have to look at rearranging my life? And that's an issue with people who start doing this work, that things start, in fact, my students have a name for it. It's called the shaken snow globe. That in the first in the first few weeks of doing this work and all these changes are going on. And then, they walk out into their world and it's like, well, the world is the same old, but I'm different. And they call it the shaken snow globe. And so, we move through that. We start getting, start strengthening ourselves, our awareness, and being able to know what to say and how to say it out there is very important. And so what I'm seeing is a crying need for better integration with full-blown psychedelic journeys. And that's one of the things I also offer in my work, is if somebody is going to do a psychedelic journey, well, for goodness sakes, do some work where you're going to start conditioning your nervous system so that you can actually take what comes up. Because what we have been doing historically, most of us, is pushing it away. It feels so awful. Those emotions that come up, they feel so awful. So what am I going to do? I don't want to look at them. Maybe I'll have a drink. Maybe I'll get really stoned and just, and not have to face it. Or, there's shopping. There's, of course, the big one is the phone, right? You're always on social media and
Right.
being able to just get lost in that. So you don't
Sugar,
have to
even
feel
like
what you're feeling.
snack food or sugar. I mean, everybody has their vice,
huge.
right? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And when I hear you talk, it sounds like there's just different phases, right? Because how we talked about earlier, feeding the cognitive mind with the emotions that you want to tackle, then understanding how you can use you can microdose psilocybin or cannabis to kind of identify and work through that. But then the integration process of, once you've come to this realization, now the world hasn't changed in the way in which it operates, right? And people within that world. So it's like this 3-phase approach, and the last phase is to effectively integrate in society with what you've learned.
Well said. And I have an open enrollment. So I have 4 modules a year for 2 months long each. And so it's a rolling start. So the new people, you can actually track the experience and the conditioning that people have. My graduates are like, everything's cool. I'm navigating in calm, centered clarity after working with all the emotions and conditioning that nervous system. So important, the toning of it, because what I say is that we're all these 90-pound weaklings when it comes to our nervous system. And it's a different thing, Kevin. Like, you say that you work out and you're an athlete. And going to the gym and working out those muscle groups is really important, but there's a totally different way to work out your nervous system. And that's what we do. So it's really interesting, though. Some of the men a while back in my group, some of the men complained because they had some resistance to even the practices. And we talked about, well, if we framed it a different way, and so we called them neural workouts as opposed to meditation, and they just felt better. And then there were other students who said, I don't care what you call it. It's great and good. And I love it. And I'm going to continue doing it. So
no, I like the neural workouts. That's good. And I mean, myself personally, during the pandemic and even after, I microdose, right? And I try to, this is the first time where I've really talked about microdosing with intention and whatnot, but everything that I was doing prior was with intention, because I understand that there are benefits from this plant medicine. I mean, obviously, Eastern culture has used, psilocybin and cannabis for thousands of years, right? And so I totally see the benefits of it. And I want to ask you, what have you seen, in terms of your patients, your clients, what do they look like once they've gone through the process? And are they completely changed? Are they transformed? What do you see?
Beautiful question. Thank you. Yeah, I tend to describe my work as walking with people through their dark night of the soul, because this is what happens when I have a lot of people who come to me initially and they have night terrors, or they cannot go to sleep, or like me, waking up with anxiety and going to bed with anxiety, and their days punctuated with it. That was me back in the day. And so people who are wrestling with that and have been pushing it away, what this work is in doing is intentionally inviting you to call up the emotion. And remember that tsunami of emotions, what we're doing is parsing them out so we know what is coming up and we know why it is coming up. That's the work. So early on, that's that shaken snow globe, and it can be, it's simple, but it's not easy. But this work is the most effective and efficient way I have found to walk through the dark night of the soul to get to the other side. And there's no doubt about it. You have to go through it to get on the other side, to see the light. So every 8 weeks, and I offer either you can just do 1 8-week, or you can come on and do the whole master series. And most of my people opt for, after they have been introduced to it and see how they're coming along, they actually come in and join the whole master series for the full year. And you can actually see incrementally the module 1 and module 2, how people are getting, the first time it's kind of like, oh, and then the second time it's like, oh, okay, I'm getting some equilibrium here and going. And then, the third one is that, that okay, I'm doing it, and I'm seeing these emotions and I'm working with them. And we come together and we talk about it. I mean, the group dynamic is just spectacular. I love our group settings. It's simply magic when you bring together groups of people who, share a passion for healing. And categorically, even though I do private sessions, I believe the group processing accelerates the emotional healing, because when you share, everybody else in the group goes, yeah, there's a seed of that for me, or, oh, I recognize what that person is talking about in my situation. So where was I going with that? You're good at keeping me on track.
Well, no, I mean, you answered the question, basically kind of what you've seen in terms of, how people, like what the end result is of going through.
And then
these
the fourth,
courses, right?
And then the fourth one is people are there. They've met it and they're good. And they put it into practice, and they're feeling so much better. They're everything happens. Their relationships are better. Their work is better. They find that their gifts, they're being in touch with their gifts and able to move into other spaces where they were afraid to move before. And I have ongoing alumni continuing education. They can come in and they can audit, they can be with us. And I love it. I always have a handful of former underclassmen coming in to be with us. And it's so special because they're continuing to learn, but they share so much in the group setting about what to do and what they did and how they did it. Mm-hmm.
Right. No, that's excellent. And I mean, it's evident that there's something to this. I mean, and we're only going to be learning more and more about it, especially as more states are becoming more open to psilocybin research, adult use cannabis, to start talking about, mental health concerns, PTSD, anxiety. I mean, everything that, emotional trauma, everything that people are dealing with in this current day and age, which is a big epidemic. So, Becca, I really appreciate your time and you sharing your insights. Before we wrap up, I want to give you the floor. Is there anything that's top of mind that you want to leave the audience with before we go?
Well, of course, I just want to say that if you want to learn more about my work, may I put that out there?
Yeah, of course.
Yes, I have social media, and you and I, Kevin, we're just talking about this beforehand, that social media just bottlenecks us so much. I mean, Facebook has all but kicked me off. And of course, Facebook owns Instagram, never mind about that. And YouTube just recently has, I talk about all of this stuff. This is about, you're right, it's about brain and mind health. and just because it has cannabis in it, they just have bottlenecked me. So
Right.
basically, my subscribers is just paralyzed, and so what I have,
Same here. So don't worry.
yeah, you
We're all in
know.
the same. Everybody in the cannabis creator community is dealing with it. So
And what I have found in my work is Reddit is a wonderful place to be,
there you go.
because I'm really welcomed there, and they have subreddits with psychedelics, with microdosing, mental health, and it really works. So consequently, I have my go-to at my website, which is beccawilliams.org, myname.org. And you can go there, and there's a number of goodies. I mean, I have an ongoing free community event that people seem to really enjoy. It's called Advanced Techniques to Strengthen Your Mind, Brain, and Nervous System. And then also there's a couple of quizzes that are able to help you flesh out where you are and what you need. There's one about your cannabis personality. How does cannabis fit into your personal world? It's my way of easing people into the idea of conscious cannabis, right? So I have an agenda there. And I also created a microdosing journal, free microdosing journal that you can just go to my website and download from there, because I find that the journaling is a big important thing. Let me just PS this, if you don't mind.
No, yeah.
That when we're doing this work, whether it's with the plant medicines and or the meditation, we go from our busy, active beta wave mind to alpha and theta and deeper waves where stuff comes up, it percolates up. And if we don't get it down, that's why journaling is so important, that you get these revelations down, because it's like a dream that, when you wake up in the morning, if you've had a rich dream, you wake up in the morning, it just kind of defrags. Mm-hmm. So you can, if we're going in for answers, you want to get those down. So in the scope of things, a microdosing journal to track what you're doing and how you're doing it is, your experiences, your moods, and all that are very important. So you can go there for that. And also, of course, I invite you to learn more about my upcoming 8-week masterclass courses, and all of that information is on my website. And so if it calls to you, you can add your email to our wait list and learn more about that too.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot of great information, resources, tools that are available to, you said beccawilliams.org, correct?
Yes, sir.
There you go. Well, you heard it from Becca Williams herself. Really appreciate your time again, Becca. I know that I enjoyed the conversation, and I'm sure that the audience did as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Bye-bye.
Yes. And thank you all for listening. Bye.